I think one of the challenges of seeking to be this kind of church is it's not only counter-cultural in general, but it is to some extent counter-Christian cultural in the late 20th and into the 21st century, where I think I would say, in my view, when churches have lost a major emphasis on the things that are central, what they try to do is to provide for their people what these central realities are actually there for by other means that can never produce them in the same way. And so that has a kind of debilitating effect on the church.
Distill that.
Yes, so that what you begin to do is to look at the particular needs that particular people have and focus in an almost psychological way on how within this community can we give to these people what these people, if they were in a non-Christian community, would find in the therapist or in the psychiatrist or wherever. And what happens is there is introduced into the life of the church a loss of confidence in the Word of God to meet the needs of the people of God. In fact, sometimes to bring their needs to the surface. And then as those needs are brought to the surface, either by ongoing public ministry to enable people to apply the Word of God to their own lives, or in the community structure to find encouragement and help that doesn't lead to a kind of dependence syndrome on the expert and becoming a client or a patient. And so there's a healthy psychology as well as a strong biblical theology involved.
There's a cost to hewing to strong biblical.
Yes, there is, because it is so counterculture. I remember a friend telling me people would come to the church and say, "What's the program here?" I say, "Well, we have the Word of God ministered at this time and this time. We meet for prayer and one or two other things we do. But what's the program?" And he would say, "We meet for the Word of God and worship." And yes, but what's the program? So that actually the really important thing for people, and apparently this is true, becomes the children's program in the size of the parking lot. And so the Word of God and the worship of God's people and their fellowship together is decentralized. Because in my own view, the geographical dislocation of church buildings from communities has led to a disastrous dilution both of the community life and the reality of the church life. And actually to a reduction of the ministry of the Word of God, so that it's reduced from 2 or 3 times a week to once a week in so many instances. The proof of the pudding, is this a Scotticism? The proof of the pudding is in the eating. And the long-term evidence that we are wanting to produce in churches like this is the production of Christian men and women who just stand out in the world in which they live. And no matter what their vocation may be, the gospel oozes out of the way in which they go about their daily lives. And so people begin to ask, what kind of community produces this kind of lifestyle? So that, for example, far more important than having programs is the fact that in the middle of the street there is a family, a father, a mother, and 3 children, and the neighbours are asking the question, how is it that you manage to do this in your family life? And in a world where families are becoming so dysfunctional, actually the greatest need is not for us to produce programs for dysfunctional families, but to produce functional families that make dysfunctional families say, how does the gospel do this in your life? And you know, you can enlarge on that to men who are working in business, housewives, people who are working in hospitals, teachers in schools. And this is what Jesus means by speaking about us being salt and light. And the more we clutter the life of the church, the less we become engaged in the life of the world. You know, we become cocooned. Everything that we ever do takes place. And so eventually what happens in churches like that is that we look from our ivory tower and we complain about how bad the world is. And one of the reasons the world gets worse is because we have actually withdrawn from it instead of serving in it. And we need space and room, and we need to be strengthened and nurtured by the ministry of the Word of God, prayer, and real fellowship among God's people. So that, you know, I often think that one of the most wonderful things I hear in pastoral ministry is when someone comes among us as a fellowship and says, I didn't know church was like this. Because they've seen something, they don't yet understand what it is, but they've seen the difference the gospel makes in the community. And, you know, how whatever happens in the next 20, 25 years socially and culturally, when you're building a church on these principles, you know that that church will be able to stand and be fruitful through thick and thin. And, you know, I think that was the great vision from the beginning, and the first 15 years, you know, have been a great beginning.